Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here today. We have been receiving a lot of phone calls and emails from constituents about the NDIA and the NDIS. What's the fundamental need of having an NDIA and an NDIS as separate agencies? While they have different functions, the functions of NDIA and NDIS could be combined, doing away with the whole department and a host of bureaucracies currently costing the taxpayer millions of dollars. It's confusing to people. Could you please explain them?
Sure, Senator. So we have a scheme that's set out under the Act. There is only one agency, which is the National Disability Insurance Agency. We also have a commission. That might be what you're referring to, the National Quality and Safeguards Commission. But the NDIS is not an agency. It's not an entity of any type. It's a scheme.
Okay. So why are people so confused about it?
I think that over the course of the last 11 years, we haven't necessarily done the greatest job of explaining and communicating this scheme and who it's for and who it's not for, and what type of supports you can get on the NDIS and what supports you can get from outside the NDIS. Some of the confusion you might be speaking about goes to whether people have got an issue with their provider. So if they have an issue with their provider, often it's the National Quality and Safeguards Commission that you can make a complaint to if that's a registered provider. But obviously we also have things called local area coordinators, and that's a partnership we have with the community sector, which is often when people go in the first instance to speak to someone about getting onto the scheme. There are a lot of people involved in this scheme, and one of the review's recommendations is to really streamline that and to have this concept of a navigator. And so we can start to have one person walk with a person with disability in an end-to-end kind of way along the planning process.
Okay. What's being done in relation to auditing agency service providers who are sucking the scheme dry through fraudulent claims for services, overcharged or not, actually even provided?
It's an excellent question. I might ask John Dardo to come to the table, who can take you through all the work we're doing on our crackdown on fraud.
Thank you, Senator. John Dardo, Deputy CEO, and I look after contact centres and the integrity functions as well.
So what are the functions?
The integrity functions, which do things like compliance and fraud and
Thank you.
Integrity checks. Before I give a bit of a summary about the work that we're doing, there's a couple of things that are really important to note. The number one priority we have when we do integrity work is to make sure that participant safety is looked after. So as we talk about the stuff today, it'll be easy for some people to assume that participant safety is not the number one thing we do, but participant safety is actually the most critical thing we do as we do our integrity work. As we do that integrity work, obviously we also look at things like sustainability of the scheme and making sure that the community can have confidence that people are getting the right services from the right providers. And if we do it well, we get a level playing field for the providers, because the good providers can compete on a level playing field. They don't have to compete against dodgy providers. The work we're doing has lots of layers. So there's a lot of work that we're doing to identify with intelligence the providers or the things that are bad for the scheme. And as we do that work, we're working with other agencies to build layers of defence, because there is no silver bullet to getting integrity right within the scheme. So, one thing that we have is we've got the Fraud Fusion Task Force. It's now 19 agencies.
What task force?
It's the Fraud Fusion Task Force. There are 19 government agencies. It includes us, Services Australia, we co-chair it together, the Tax Office, Attorney Generals, Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, a raft of other delivery agencies that do government payments and programs, such as education, employment and workplace relations, ASQA, who look after registered training organisations, professional standards that look after the the quality of the medical professionals, health and ageing. So there's a lot of agencies involved. And the reason we partner with those agencies is because the people that are doing the worst things against the scheme and the worst things against participants don't just work against the NDIS. They rort other systems as well. So they rort the tax system or the Medicare system or the vet system, the vocational education and training system. And the patterns they use to defraud the scheme are similar patterns across those systems. So when we work with the other agencies, we're more likely to detect those people, and we're building a preventative architecture that doesn't just stop fraud against the NDIS, it is also reusable to stop fraud against Medicare or vocational education and training, right? Or family daycare or childcare. So that task force is going brilliantly. It has a regular rhythm. We do a lot of work together to develop intelligence. We have intelligence alerts that come out to all the relevant agencies about providers or schemes to defraud. We then act on those to either stop payments or to work with the Commission, who are also on the task force, to prevent bad players from being registered providers. And in some cases, we do operations together. So ASQA, the guys that look after registered training organisations, only came on board in the last month or so. Within a week or two of coming on board, we worked with them. A tax office provided some support, the Commission provided support, and warrants were executed on a provider that was problematic. So we work together really, really well.
Thank you. How many service providers have been charged for falsely claiming fees for services not provided?
There are many, many dozens. Right now there are approximately 20 prosecutions in progress, as in right in front of the courts right now.
That's across Australia.
Yep, but there's also several that are imminent. So the affidavits have been produced. The work has been done with law enforcement. It's been done with CDPP to either result in warrants or to result in charges. So search warrants or charges. So there's more in the pipeline that are imminent. But in addition to that, we've got to keep in mind that prosecution is the last resort. What we want to do is build a scheme where they can't even get to the point of doing dodgy claims.
What I have seen, what I've concluded, is that the NDIS was started as an election promise. It was cobbled together, flung out there. It wasn't ready to go. And as a result, there have been two things. Initially, a lot of corruption because the systems were loose, which is understandable. And then, as they tightened up, some people were missing out on services. So could you give me on notice, please, since inception of the NDIS, the number of people charged for falsely claiming fees for services not provided? On an annual basis? I'd like to see if there's a trend, if there's a pickup, decrease. And I mentioned the fact that when you have a trend, it may be due to better enforcement or due to,
Senator, I think, and keep in mind what the charges that are laid aren't phrased exactly the way you described them, but certainly we can give you on notice the trend. What I will say is we are detecting now more than we could ever detect before because the systems were not mature and have been matured as we invest more in building more mature systems. So for example, for certainly the last 6 to 8 years, payments would be going out the door, and there were some periods through the day or through a weekend where payments were being processed where no NDIA eyes or human eyes were looking at those payments. So payments were walking out the door without any system knowing that the payments were going out the door because the systems were not mature enough or built in a way to prevent those payments.
We all know that the Minister has been talking a lot about tightening up because ultimately the cost is getting out of control. And then what that means is that people who deserve good care don't get it. So we're protecting people to ensure they get their care in the future by holding back on the fraudsters.
Absolutely, and so and to give you, examples, there's the prosecutions, but even more important than that, in terms of just the volume of the response that we're implementing at the moment. There's the stoppers. There's the stopping of payments we do for providers that are problematic or the claims are problematic.
So you're making them jump through more hoops.
We're stopping the claims, and we're saying we're not confident that this claim is legitimate. You need to provide evidence that it's legitimate. In some of our stopper work, we're hitting 50 to 87% stop rates on claims. So we have providers that have put claims in. We're saying, sorry, that doesn't look quite right, and they're either withdrawing or cancelling their claims, or not responding at all. They're walking away completely, and in some cases they're shutting down their businesses and walking away because they've realised the game is up. And the claims, we're not talking at the margins. We're talking some of these claims are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
We've heard about it.
Or in the millions of dollars, and our ability to now detect it is allowing us to stop it before it goes out. If we can stop it before it goes out, we then don't have to try and recover the money or raise a debt to recover the money. We need to get better at stopping it before they even can exist to make the claim. We need to get better at bringing that further forward in the supply chain. But I can, as we look at many of these claims and many of these providers, what we're seeing is the behaviours have been going on for years. It's just that we're better now at seeing them and preventing them or stopping them. It is generating some angst, and I'll describe that in more detail. If a provider has been really bad in the system in setting up their business model to take funds out of the system, with an understanding with participants or nominees that they would provide a certain set of services which maybe should not have been provided by the NDIS, whether it be rent subsidies, alcohol, other lifestyle expenses, gift vouchers, gift cards, and the participants or their nominees have become accustomed to that as a standard of living, or they've signed leases on the understanding that that was the lifestyle that they would enjoy, and we're now identifying those providers are problematic and saying, sorry, you can't keep claiming that money to subsidise that type of spend. You can imagine some of our participants are having their standard of living disrupted, right?
That is a recurring theme in some of the questions constituents push to us, that genuine care is not being considered, but lifestyle choices are, and so money's going on that. When will families, and this is another one that's recurring, when will families or friends supporting a person with high-level needs be appropriately supported? Because we're saying they're not adequately supported, but care providers are being overly supported.
I think there's certainly some really black and white spaces. There are providers that are just providers, and they're just, they're brilliant and they're awesome, and what they do is fantastic. There are some providers where they've got a big business model. They do some good work, but they do a whole bunch of dodgy stuff to supplement their income or their lifestyle or their business. There are some providers that are really just fraudsters and criminals and criminal syndicates and using the NDIS for cash flow. There are some participants and providers that are the same thing. We have participants who actually have set up businesses to pay themselves to look after themselves, or nominees who have set up businesses to look after their kids. So we have examples of cases where it's not clear that it's a provider or a participant or a nominee because it's all intermingled. So the family group has set up 3 entities and they're paying each other to look after each other. Or a mother has drawn down $100,000 a year as an income to pay herself for looking after a child with disability. So there are some things there that are very intermingled between a provider and a participant. The conflicts of interest are pretty extreme. And then you have participants where they've not understood what they can and can't agree to with a provider, so they're accepting things that they shouldn't be. Examples, just in the last week, a $20,000 holiday, a $10,000 holiday. And then there are participants where They may be claiming things that they shouldn't, and in the past would have probably not been detected. So we had a participant that bought a car, brand new, $73,000. Money was processed overnight. Now, fortunately, when we were able to approach them, they understood that they shouldn't, and they were willing to repay the money. But we have other participants where they haven't understood what they should be claiming, and we approach them, they then cease contact and refuse to engage. And then you have the vast majority of participants that are trying to do the right thing, and we've got to figure out how we get that balance right so that we help the people that are trying to do the right thing get it right more often. The providers that are doing an awesome job, help them survive and help them flourish. And then the ones that are running mixed businesses, really we need to exit them from the scheme. And the providers that are dodgy, we need to exit them from all government services, not just the scheme. We need to exit them from Medicare and APRA and everything else that they're involved with.
Senator, this will need to be the last question.
Okay, can you give us the number of providers who've been exited from the system per year for the last 5 years, please?
We can. There are some different metrics there, but we can see what we can
represent
for you.
What's happening. Yep. It sounds like you're waking up. Well, the system, the agency is waking up. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.